Hey, good afternoon and welcome to Equipped. I'm Julie Royce, filling in today for Chris Brooks. And I have just had a blast this week sitting in for Chris and getting to connect with some of you, but also connecting with some of my coworkers here at Moody Radio. Because my regular show, Up for Debate, is on the weekend, I generally don't come into the studios during the week. And given that I live 35 miles outside of Chicago, where Moody studios are, that's a good thing, except I do miss seeing some of my coworkers here. So that's been really fun, just connecting, really fellowshipping with some people I really enjoy here at Moody Radio. But also, it's been a nice change of pace to interview just one guest for an entire hour. If you're familiar with my Saturday show, Up for Debate, you know that what I generally do is invite two guests on with two different perspectives, and then we discuss some debatable topic in the church. So, for example, this week, we're going to be discussing whether Christians should do yoga. A lot of even Christian schools, churches having yoga programs. I mean, is that okay? Is that not okay? Well, joining me will be Lorette Willis, someone who started doing yoga as a 20-something. And as a result, she got sort of sucked into the New Age religion. And now she's a believer and feels very strongly that Christians should have absolutely nothing to do with yoga. However, challenging her perspective will be Bonnie Meyer. She's someone who actually owns a Christian yoga studio. And what Bonnie's done is replace the Hindu parts of yoga with Christian scripture and song. So she's kind of Christianized yoga. And apparently a lot of churches, as I said, do that as well. So we're going to mix it up on Saturday. We'll have a lot of point and counterpoint, which is not only entertaining, but it's enlightening. And that's why we do it. We want to inform and equip listeners to discern some of these issues, to discern truth from error. But I have to admit, hosting Equipped and focusing on just one guest for an entire hour has been a wonderful change of pace. So thanks for indulging me these past several days. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you have too. And I think we're in for a real treat today. Joining me is someone that I've wanted to interview for several months now. I think you're going to absolutely love him. But before I introduce him, let me ask you this. What comes to your mind when you think of Revelation and end times prophecy? Do you feel competent when it comes to interpreting scriptures concerning the Antichrist, the beast, the tribulation, and the millennial rule? Or do you feel like this stuff is kind of above your pay grade and you just need to leave it to the experts, the theologians, and, you know, that's just something you don't want to get into? Well, if you feel a little bit intimidated, that's okay. I think we've all been there when it comes to this topic. But here's the thing that got me. Why is it that God put that stuff in the Bible? I mean, seriously, if he put it there, I'm kind of guessing, and it stands to reason, that he expects us to read it and to study it. And most importantly, doesn't God expect us to recognize the things that he's already put in there, the things he's written about, when they start coming to pass? Doesn't he expect us to see it and to be ready, to be prepared? And that's what this program's all about. It's about equipping believers. And so that's what we're going to try to do, because it's my fear that the church, by neglecting some of these things, is failing to prepare her people. And when things get really bad for Christians, as, you know, if you're reading the headlines, you're seeing things are getting hard for Christians all over the world. And it's probably going to come here as well. Let's get ready for persecution. We were talking about that yesterday with Tom Doyle about the persecution that's happening in the Middle East right now. We need to realize when this happens, and especially if the end times events start to happen, as some believe already are happening, we need to recognize that it's part of God's plan, and we need to be encouraged that God holds all of history in his hands. Well, joining me to help equip us and prepare us is pastor, missionary, and New York Times bestselling author Joel Richardson. And I first became acquainted with Joel when he wrote a book called Islamic Antichrist. And I remember thinking, Islamic Antichrist? Come on, that can't possibly be. I mean, everybody I know that teaches on this topic says the Antichrist is going to come from a revived Roman Empire. But the book intrigued me. So I started reading it, and I found it surprisingly compelling. And as I'm reading it, I actually went to a very famous preacher that if I said the name, most of you would probably recognize him. He doesn't want to go on the record about this, but I did ask him, I said, so what do you think about this Islamic Antichrist? Is there anything to this? And he said, Julie, when I first heard it, I thought it was a little far-fetched. Then I started reading, I started studying, and the more I do, the more I think it has merit. So I hope you'll approach this hour with an open mind as we explore with Joel not just the identity of the Antichrist and his empire, but the identity of what Revelation 17 and 18 refers to as the great prostitute or Babylon, someone or something so evil and abhorrent that it says she's drunk with the blood of God's holy people. So, Joel, welcome. It is a real pleasure and an honor to have you today.
Well, it's a tremendous pleasure and honor for me to be back on with you, Julie. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Yeah, well, Joel's been on a couple of times, once on Up for Debate, and I think when I filled in before, you've been on with me. So again, just really looking forward to today. But let me just start with that first question that I alluded to. Why should believers even care about this mystery Babylon? I mean, what role does Babylon play in the end times, and why is it important that we know her identity anyway?
Sure. No, it's a great question, and I think it's good that you touched on that so many believers and even pastors out there, that there's a real hesitancy to even touch the issue of the end times. One of the things that I mentioned at the beginning of the book is that whenever we, as particularly teachers and leaders, whenever we neglect any particular topic that is biblical, that's in the Bible, that the Bible emphasizes, then what we often do is we give it over to the sects, the fringe groups, and sort of the cults and so forth, and they always sort of run with it. And so it's so important that those of us who are responsible students of the Scriptures, that we do lay hold of this information and study and so forth, because it's much better that these difficult segments of the Bible are rightly handled by responsible Bible teachers rather than just giving it over to the cults. But Mystery Babylon, or really it's not technically Mystery Babylon, it is a mystery, and it's Babylon the Great. But this makes up two of the final chapters of the Bible. I mean, this is the longest prophecy in the New Testament, and it's a metaphor. When it refers to this prostitute, she is a metaphor for a very real, identifiable geopolitical entity that will have tremendous financial and religious sway over much of the earth in the last days. And if we believe we're in the last days, then this is actually incredibly relevant information. And in light of some of the different interpretations that have been offered out there, some people, for instance, say that it's New York City or the United States. For many years, Protestants say that it's the Vatican or Rome, the Catholic Church. Getting this issue right and really peering into this and carefully looking at it, it has tremendous relevance for how we view, for instance, the United States or our Catholic Christians throughout the earth and this sort of thing. So it's definitely a very relevant prophecy, but it is admittedly, I kind of call it the final frontier of Bible prophecy. It's something that does need to be handled with great care.
Well, let me just start diving in then, because I understand that understanding the identity of Babylon, the key to that, or at least one of the keys, is understanding the nature of the beast, this empire of the Antichrist. And Scripture says that Babylon, personified as a woman in Revelation, will come riding a beast. And as you write, the eschatological city is one that will be intimately related to the final beast empire. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people say it's got to be a revived Roman Empire. And as I understand, the basis for that is Daniel 9:26, where it says, the people of the ruler who will come, or the people of the Antichrist, will destroy the city and the sanctuary, otherwise known as Jerusalem and the temple. Well, as everyone knows, right, the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in 79 AD, so clearly the Antichrist must come from Rome. But you say no, that yes, General Titus presided over Jerusalem at the time of the attack, but you say the Romans didn't actually carry it out. And I've never heard this before. This was really enlightening for me. And as a history buff, I was actually just in Rome with my husband about a week ago. So this is extremely relevant and interesting to me. But explain yourself on that, because everybody's thinking, yeah, it's got to be Rome.
Right. Well, I mean, just to put this in perspective, it was Rome that carried it out. But the question is, what does the term Roman mean? Roman is a term that refers to citizenship. It's not an ethnic term. So, are we saying that the people of the Antichrist will be Italians? Because ultimately that's what Rome meant if we're looking at it ethnically. But when you look at the actual text itself, the Hebrew word that is used it's am. Just we would write it as transliterated as am, and it's an ethnic denotation. And so it's the Am Nagid, the people of the prince to come. So this ethnic denotation, it's important that we take note of that. It's not a reference to citizenship. Paul the Apostle was a Roman citizen, but of course, ethnically speaking, he was a Jew. I just did Ancestry.com. I'm an American, but that doesn't really give me much information in terms of my ethnic makeup. And so the verse is referring to the ethnicity of the peoples who destroy the city and the sanctuary. When we do a little bit of research, we see that in AD 16, under Emperor Augustus, Rome began this sweeping series of reforms, and they essentially started outsourcing their military. And so if there was a particular legion, a Roman military legion that was stationed, for instance, in what is today Israel, well, they would draw their recruits from people from that region, known as the provincials. And so when you really just do a simple, careful study of the events of history, you look at Josephus, Tacitus, and the different historians, we see that the overwhelming majority of the peoples who carried out the destruction were referred to as Syrians and Arabs. Now, Syrian, of course, back then was a Roman province, and it referred to the Middle Eastern peoples. But the point is that if we take the verse for what it actually says, we do a little research, we dig under the surface a little bit, it's not referring to Italians or even just citizens of Rome. Rather, it's referring to the peoples that destroyed the city, which again points to the Middle East, the nations that surround Israel, which also aligns with all of the other prophets. You look at the words of Joel, of Zechariah, and they say that in the last days, these Gentile nations would surround Jerusalem, and it refers to the peoples round about, or the nations round about. So we have to understand that the context of the end times is Jerusalem, and that really becomes sort of the linchpin, if you will, of interpreting and understanding the end times, is to understand that it's a very Israel and Jerusalem-centric story.
So you're saying that the people of the ruler who is to come are actually people that would have resided in Syria, that would have resided in these areas right around Jerusalem. And so today, what ethnic people would that be?
Well, again, to me, this is simply the retelling of the same story that begins at the beginning of the Bible, the clash between Abraham's children. It's the children of Ishmael. It's the children of Esau, children of Edom, and all of the various desert peoples as they began to mix and so forth. And so we're looking at the nations today that are overwhelmingly Muslim majority nations, Arabs and Egyptians and Turks and, so on and so forth. And, for clarity, it's not because the Lord is opposed to any particular ethnic people, but it is these nations which harbor what is referred to as the everlasting hatred. And it's this essentially demonically charged hatred of the Jewish people, this anti-Semitic spirit, and this demonic lust to possess the promised land of God, the anti-Zionism, which is really sort of a foundational component doctrinally of Islam. And so, while the Bible does point to the ethnicity of some of these empires in the same way that with the episode of the writing on the wall, Daniel said, "Mene, mene, tekel, Perez, you've been found wanting, your kingdom's divided, and it's given to the Persians." It's pointing to the nature of the empire of the last days Antichrist empire, if you will, and it points to a Middle Eastern empire.
Well, we need to go to break, but when we come back, I'm going to ask Joel, so what is the city that's Babylon, the one that's spoken of in Revelation 17 and 18? And maybe you have some questions as well. You're wondering, hey, I've always been taught this, or maybe you want to push back on something that Joel just said, or maybe you just have some real confusion about anything that's been said. I would love to hear from you. 877-548-3675. Again, that's 877-548-3675. Again, you're listening to Equipped on Moody Radio. I'm Julie Royce, filling in for Chris Brooks. And joining me today is Joel Richardson, author of Islamic Antichrist, the Mideast Beast, and most recently, Mystery Babylon. We'll be right back after a short break.
Take a moment to thank all of our new equippers. Your monthly Gifts Provide a program of passionate Bible teaching aimed at equipping and mobilizing Christians from every walk of life to make disciples among the nations. You can join this growing family of believers and become an equipper yourself today. And when you do, you'll receive special weekly updates and resources that will encourage you and keep you up to date on what's happening in the world. Call today, 888-644-4144, or simply go online at equipradio.org.
Well, she's called Babylon, the great prostitute, a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. Welcome back to Equipped. I'm Julie Royce, filling in this week for Chris Brooks. And today we're exploring the identity of this mysterious city mentioned in Revelation 17 and 18. Who is this mysterious Babylon? And why is her identity so important for us to know? Joining me today to help us kind of sort this out and figure it out is internationally recognized preacher, teacher, and New York Times bestselling author, Joel Richardson. And if you'd like to know more about Joel, his book is Mystery Babylon. Just go to our website, equipradio.org. That's equipradio.org. And again, if you have a comment or a question, the number to call is 877-LIVE-675. Again, that's 877-548-3675. And we have some people lined up already wanting to ask some questions, but I want to ask really the big question. I wish I had a drum roll here, but so Joel, we've identified that you're saying the people of the prince who is to come, the Antichrist, are the people of Ishmael, the Arab people who have this demonically inspired, as you said, hatred of the Jewish people or hatred of Israel. So when it talks about Babylon and this specific geopolitical city, as you said, we're talking about, an actual city that's in modern day, it's around today. So, Joel, what would you say? What is the city that is this Babylon spoken of in Revelation?
Sure. Well, after working through all of the different options, the conclusion that I come to is that we are looking at the city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia. And in a larger sense, while it's important to emphasize that it is a very real city, it's also not rigidly and exclusively a city. So I actually identify it as Mecca, yea, Saudi Arabia, the kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And in a even looser sense, we're talking about the system that the harlot produces, which is Islam at large. So in the same way that others may say Rome or the Vatican or the Catholic Church, I'm looking at the city of Mecca as the great city of idolatry, the great last days city of idolatry, and the system of Islam, of course, that Mecca is the womb of, if you will, the fountainhead of, that's exploding all across the earth.
And I think certainly those of us who look at the current events that are happening right now, it's not that hard to imagine that the Antichrist could be coming out of some sort of Islamic caliphate. But you also think, well, back in World War II, everybody thought it was Hitler and it was going to be the German Empire and that was going to be the Antichrist. So let's bear down on some of the characteristics about Babylon that you think actually point specifically to Mecca. And I do like that even though you obviously have a conviction and you have a belief of what this Babylon is, you don't present it dogmatically, but you say, okay, consider this. So that's how we're going to present it today, because there's a lot of Bible teachers who feel differently on this. And, there's one of these things where we reason together. So let's start with some of the characteristics. I know one of them is that this city will be a city of excess luxury. Correct?
Yeah. Yeah, this is clearly one of the primary descriptions throughout Revelation 17 and 18 is this woman lives in luxury. She causes the kings of the earth to live in luxury with her. The kings of the earth compromise because of their ability to live in luxury with her and so forth. And, of course, you look at Saudi Arabia, and it fits, like hand in glove. You can't point to any American artist, any musician, any real estate mogul, or even president, no matter, people that are known for excess wealth. And even they don't compare to the really over-the-top excess that we find with regard to the Saudi royal family in terms of just legendary stories, from gold-plated toilets to, private jets filled with, gold-plated this and that to entire fleets of cars. And some of these are princes that are, several tiers down the row, if you will. And so I share a lot of the stories, which that side of it is actually fun, just to look at some of the excess that exists in the kingdom. But it definitely meets that criteria quite precisely.
Share one of those stories, because I found those absolutely fascinating, and I was just blown away by some of the specifics of the wealth that the Saudi royal family has. It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. There was one example, because this was a little bit more recent, where you had, again, this a young prince. I mean, he's in his 20s, and he's quite a few tiers down, because the Saudi royal family, they give stipends to all of the royals, but the closer you are to the top, the more that is. And so, of course, this family is multiplying the longer that the kingdom goes on. But so here's a young guy in his 20s, and he's sort of hanging out in London. He's partying with some of these big rap artists. And he shows up in London with a fleet of, I want to say, about 10 different cars. And each one of these cars is $200,000-$300,000 each. In an entire entourage, and people are going, "Who is this guy? What, who's this prince? Who is he the son of?" So these aren't, just your standard Maseratis or pimped out Lexus or this sort of thing. I mean, these are just, each one is over the top. And again, he shows up just traveling, spending a few weeks in London with roughly a dozen of these. And stories of some of the kings going to Monaco and gambling away $20 million in a night just for a evening of fun. And this is 20, 30 years ago. That $20 million then is worth more like, $40 million now. Again, this is wealth. You don't see Donald Trump wasting this kind of money. You don't see, the greatest American sports figure or even Bill Gates, wasting this kind of money, throwing it around. But stories like this out of Saudi Arabia are standard fare.
Yeah, and all this money comes from oil, correct?
Overwhelmingly, everyone says, well, what does Saudi Arabia produce? It produces two things. It produces oil, and it produces radical Islam. Mm-hmm. And, and again, when then you talk about the corruption of the kings of the earth that come as a result of this, and I might be jumping ahead of myself, but you look at the degree to which that money has allowed the Saudis to sink their claws into some of the most, not just some of, but virtually every one of the most prominent politicians, senators, congressmen, corporations, news media outlets in the United States, right up to the various presidents.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was stunned to read that up until recently, Saudi Arabia was one of the major stockholders in Fox News. I mean, that's what we can think of as a very conservative news outlet. And I'm thinking, as you're talking about the sort of the arms and the way that Saudi Arabia has sort of been integrated, we just had the most major arms deal that I think the U.S. has ever done that involved weapons being sold to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, billions. I'm not sure what the number was, 200 some odd billion. And this is I have mixed feelings about it, because on one hand, despite all of the very mixed feelings that most of us Christians of conviction have with regard to the current administration, there is the legitimate bright light that he is not a politician that has the background of being, bought and paid for by the Saudis. He's not beholden to all of these lobby powers and so forth. And so, for good or for bad, the fact that Trump was able to get into these Twitter wars with Prince Ali bin Talal, that was actually a bright light.
Well, there's a lot to unpack, and we're going to unpack it on the other side of break, but we have to go to break right now. And the number to call if you'd like to weigh in or ask a question, 877-548-3675. That's 877-LIVE-675. Again, I'm Julie Roys. You're listening to Equipped on Moody Radio. Joining me today, Joel Richardson, preacher, teacher, and best-selling author of Mystery Babylon. We'll be right back after a short break. Well, her identity has been debated for centuries. Who is Babylon, mentioned in Revelation 17 and 18? And why is her identity so important for believers to know? Welcome back to Equipped. I'm Julie Roys, and today I'm speaking with Joel Richardson, a preacher, teacher, and author of the recently released Mystery Babylon. And perhaps you've always believed, like I did for a long time, that the Antichrist would come from a revived Roman Empire and that the end-time city Babylon might be Rome itself. Of course, many good Bible teachers do teach that, and they may be right. I mean, who knows? Till we get there, none of us know for sure. But in fact, we had a debate on my show, Up for Debate, a couple of years ago with Joel and Dr. Thomas Ice, who holds the revived Roman Empire, that view. And if you'd actually like to see that or hear that and review those arguments on both sides, you can do that. We've actually posted a link to that debate that happened between Joel and Thomas Ice. So just go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/Equipped Radio. That's facebook.com/Equipped Radio, and you can hear that debate between Joel and Thomas Ice. Also, if you have a question, we have a number of you calling in right now, 877-LIVE-675. That's 877-548-3675. But as Joel explained in the last half hour, he believes that eschatological city called Babylon in Revelation is actually modern-day Mecca, and that the beast empire spoken of in Revelation is actually an Islamic caliphate. And we were going through some of the characteristics that Babylon will have that kind of match up with Mecca, and there's a number of them still I'd like to talk about. But let me just go to one that I think it really stands out to me. Maybe because just 2 days ago on this program we were talking about human trafficking and modern day slavery. But one of them is that it will be a city of slavery, and this is something that's been, I think, shocking to a lot of us that this is still happening. In fact, it's happening on a larger scale than probably during the transatlantic slave trade, what's going on. So, Joel, why does Mecca line up with that one?
First of all, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia right now is roughly 30 million people. About 2/3 are citizens and 1/3 are foreign workers. So you have a nation which is a significant percentage, 1 in 3 are foreign workers. When you look at the conditions of these foreign workers, many of them are literally living like slaves. They're put in these, essentially these like huts at night, these little bunk houses. They're locked at night. A lot of them come from Indonesia, from the Philippines, and so forth. And that's just to build the country and keep it working. When you look at the harems and so forth that many of these Saudi princes have, and I don't even know if I mention it in the book, but about 15 years ago, there used to be an organization called Americans Against the Sawduction of America. And it was literally formed by parents whose children had been kidnapped and who were being kept against their will in Saudi Arabia. It's one of the few countries that the United States has zero extradition policy with. And so this is not just an issue of, Sally Fields, not without my daughter, someone marries a Saudi and then they have it. This is literally children being kidnapped and whisked away by Saudi royals to become part of their essentially sex slaves. It's well documented. It's not, a far out conspiracy theory. And it's heartbreaking. It's disgusting, but I mean, it is documented, verifiable reality in the kingdom.
And I want to get to some of the other possibilities and allow you to address some of those. And we have some callers that have some other possibilities that they want to throw out there. But one other characteristic that I think is important to note is that Babylon will be a city. It says it's drunk with the blood of the saints, a city that promotes the murder of both Christians and Jews alike. Discuss that a little bit and how you see that matching with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, well, and of course, the city of Mecca, you're not allowed in it unless you're a Muslim. It's not to say that Muslims are the only ones there, and this is a part of the prophecy that I think is pertaining to the system that Mecca promotes, that Babylon promotes. So I travel to the Middle East quite frequently. I was just in Iraq just recently. And when you have examples where Christians are being systematically wiped out of large parts of the Middle East, and many of them, of course, I'm a firm Protestant, but many of them are Chaldean Catholics, some of the ancient peoples that have lived there forever. And what's amazing is that despite the fact that you have Christians by the tens and even hundreds of thousands that are being kidnapped, murdered, raped, executed overwhelmingly by Muslims, you still have many Christians that say, yeah, but the Catholics are the real problem. And this is, I understand that we don't interpret the Bible based on the newspaper, what's going on today, because tomorrow can change. But at a certain point, you can also be so leery of newspaper exegesis that you actually are not willing to even look at reality. And the reality today is that the top 20-plus nations where you have the worst persecution of Christians throughout the earth are Muslim-majority nations. And Saudi Arabia is the womb from which the most radical, vile, violent, and terrorist-oriented form of Islam emanates. You call it Wahhabism or Salafism. Saudi Arabia is the womb.
And yet we think of her as an ally of the United States, almost overlooking, the September 11th terrorists. They came from Saudi Arabia, most of them.
The overwhelming majority were from Saudi Arabia, and for the few days after 9/11, the entire airfield was shut down. The only people in the whole nation that were allowed to still fly freely was Saudi princes.
Isn't that something? Well, I want to go to our phone lines because there are some folks on there that have some different ideas, some questions about this. So let's go to Joe. He's calling in from Florida. And Joe, you have a feeling that it's not Mecca, that Babylon is another city. What's your thought?
And I do apologize for this. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I believe that America is the new Babylon. A lot of people, yes, we are a Christian state, and we believe in God, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. But in my walks, I have found where people, just like myself, because I've only started walking in 2007, do not understand what Christianity is and what God has done for its people. And the entitlement that we have in this country, the confusion that we have in this country. The other day, per se, I was enjoying my son at a vacation Bible school, and a young man told my son, stay away. And I asked him why. He goes, because you people keep coming over here. I'm Hispanic. I'm Puerto Rican heritage, but I was raised up in America. And my mother, who was born in Puerto Rico, fought in America for many education values. And this is the situation that we're having, that we're not understanding exactly what is our freedoms, our rights, our privilege, and also we're not understanding who is our God. Okay?
All right, let me throw this to Joel, because I've heard this a number of times by people I respect who say Babylon is America, or some have said specifically New York City because it fits some of the excess, maybe luxury and it's sort of an economic center for the United States. So how do you respond? Could America be Babylon?
Sure. This is an increasingly popular view, and what we need to understand is that whatever perspective we're considering, whatever view we're considering, it has to line up with the text. And Mystery Babylon is described in Revelation 17 and 18 as, yes, a significant economic power base, but also as a religious fountainhead. Not just a religious fountainhead, but the religion which is responsible for the shed blood of the saints throughout the earth. And on that side of it, the United States simply does not meet the criteria. The United States is not a religion, and it is most certainly not responsible, the primary entity in the last days responsible for the shed blood of the saints. For all of America's problems, for any of the negative influences that we have around the world, and there are many reasons to criticize the United States, we are still far and away the single greatest gospel-sending nation in the earth, accounting for roughly 80% of the global missionaries, accounting for roughly 80% of the global funding for the gospel going forward. So this is a big issue in terms of just pastoral application, because if it is the United States, one, the prophecy says get out to all true believers, and it's set up as the worst entity imaginable in the last days. I believe that we're called to contend for revival, for an outpouring of repentance throughout this nation, rather than giving up on her as the entity that is about to be judged by God and destroyed forever. I think as a believer, my responsibility is to contend for the United States to have a genuine spirit of repentance sweep over her. And so this is one of the reasons why studying this prophecy does have very legitimate pastoral ramifications.
I want to bring up another one, and that is the possibility that somebody wrote this on Facebook, actually. Let me just read what she said. Julia said, there is only one harlot spoken of in Scripture, apostate Israel. And then she quoted Jeremiah 3:8, and I saw that for all the adulteries of faithless Israel, I had sent her away and given her a writ of divorce, yet her treacherous sister Judah did not fear, but she went and was a harlot also. A number of people saying this could possibly be Jerusalem. Could Jerusalem be this harlot spoken of in Revelation 17 and 18? Joel, I'm going to give you a chance to answer that question on the other side of break. But right now we do need to take a short break. Again, you are listening to Equipped on Moody Radio. I'm Julie Roys, filling in for Chris Brooks, and joining me today is Joel Richardson, a preacher, teacher, and best-selling author of Mystery Babylon. I'd love to hear from you as well. Do you have a question or a comment? The number, 877-548-3675. That's 877-548-3675. Or you can always email us, equipped@moody.edu. That's equipped@moody.edu. When I come back from break, we'll talk about, could it be Jerusalem? Could Jerusalem be that harlot in Revelation? Or is it something else? Or, as Joel says, could it be Mecca? Is that who it is? We'll be right back.
From the highest levels of government to your neighborhood public school, Christianity seems to be under attack. But we don't have to retreat. We can engage at any level when we're equipped with intelligent and relevant reasons for the hope that lies within us. In Rick Cornish's book, The 5-Minute Apologist, you'll find clear and succinct information you can use to defend your faith. This great resource can be yours for a gift of any size to equip. Give an impact gift today and request the 5-Minute Apologist. Call 888-644-4144 or go to equipradio.org.
Well, could it be that the Mystery Babylon spoken of in Revelation 17 and 18 is actually modern-day Mecca, and that the Beast Empire will be an Islamic caliphate? Welcome back to Equipped. I'm Julie Roys, filling in for Chris Brooks. And today we're exploring this whole question of Babylon, this great harlot that's spoken of, with Joel Richardson, preacher, teacher, and best-selling author of Mystery Babylon. And we actually have 2 copies of his book, Mystery Babylon. If you'd like To get a copy of that book and have an opportunity to win that, just go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/equipped-radio. That's facebook.com/equipped-radio. Like our page, leave a comment, and then you'll be entered in a drawing for that book. So again, facebook.com/equipped-radio. So Joel, right before break, I actually read a Facebook comment by somebody who said, hey, the only harlot spoken of in Scripture is Israel itself. And that's a popular view, that this harlot spoken of is actually Jerusalem will be Babylon. What do you say?
Well, first, it's not true that Jerusalem is the only entity referred to as a harlot. In the Old Testament, it refers to the city of Nineveh as the harlot city. It refers to the city of Tyre as the harlot city. So she began with a false statement. Now, she quoted Jeremiah 3, and it says, God says, I've given you a certificate of divorce. But then as you read further, he says, yet I say, come back to me. Mm-hmm. And so we need to understand that the Bible does not teach replacement theology, which is the idea that God has forever divorced Israel. Rather, it teaches what Paul the Apostle says, which is that there is a partial temporary hardening that has come to Israel, but at the fullness of time, all of Israel will come back to him. So the Lord is not going to fail on his mission impossible, if you will, his people Israel. The time will come when they will return to him. So you do have people that say in 70 AD, Jerusalem fulfilled the role of the harlot, but it simply does not line up with the criteria. Jerusalem was not the great persecuting entity of the first century, nor was it a great economic powerhouse throughout the region. Now, there are some that say Jerusalem will be in the future last days the harlot city, and even the Antichrist himself will be Jewish. That also doesn't line up with the Scriptures. The Scriptures repeatedly refer to as a coalition of Gentile nations surrounding Jerusalem. As it says in Luke 21, Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So it's a popular view, but whether we're dealing with the preterist, the historical, or the future perspective, they simply don't line up with the text.
And getting to why it matters, because I'm trying to do that as much as possible, that this isn't just some academic exercise. Why does this matter? Well, the same way that you said, it matters whether we think it's Rome or the Vatican, whether the Catholic Church will be sort of the empire that the Antichrist will come from, or if we think it's actually God's rejection of the Israelite people, of the Jewish people, which actually Scripture says there's going to be, they're going to feature quite prominently in end times, not as the Antichrist, but really as someone that he fulfills his promises to. And when you talk about replacement theology, now there's a lot of replacement theologians who aren't anti-Semitic, but yet replacement theology, hasn't that been sort of a seedbed for an awful lot of anti-Semitism over the years?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as I say that God is permanently chastising you and he really doesn't like you anymore, try as I might, eventually I will begin treating you as if I don't like you anymore. And, that's fairly simplified, but really that is the pattern of history. We begin with an idea, eventually it produces action. And the church has begun with replacement theology, and it's often result in tremendous mistreatment of the Jewish people down through history.
But what about the person who's saying, well, isn't that what you're doing to the Muslim people right now? And what's your disposition towards the Muslim people if you think that they're part of, that the Antichrist is going to come from an Islamic caliphate? How do you answer that?
Well, yeah, and it's a very important question. Our job is to rescue and snatch as many out of the fire as possible. I can't apologize for saying that Islam is evil, but Muslims are people deceived by an ideology. See, Judaism is actually an ethnic identity. You're born a Jew. So once you say God's done with the Jews, it becomes a real racial issue. But to say that the system of Islam is that which is perpetuating this hatred, you say, well, then we are going to be clear about the nature of Islam, its demonic origins, but we're going to try to rescue as many people out of Islam as possible. And so I have to go out of my way to make sure that I'm living that lifestyle, because God forbid that anybody would read any of my material and use it to further their prejudices and hatreds, because there's enough of that out there in the world, even in the church right now.
And you spent a lot of your life ministering to the Muslim people, am I right?
we're involved in some of the most difficult, restricted nations in Iran and Iraq and Syria. And I kind of joke. I say I do Bible prophecy to fund my missions habit. Which is,
I love that.
Well, which is what I can't always talk about it.
Yeah, I understand that. Well, I think we might have time for just one more call really quickly. I have somebody calling in from Pennsylvania. Question, is it about a one world religion? Is that right? Yelissa, is it?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi. Yeah, Yelissa, your question quickly.
Yes, basically that, because who do you guys think it would be the last world religion? Because as far as I know, there's only one religion that's out persecuting Christians. And is that going to change to a whole different religion?
Yeah. And I've heard a lot of people say like the last Antichrist, that the Antichrist will be part of sort of this one world religion that will be sort of a conglomeration of a lot of religions. What do you say, Joel?
Well, again, when we look at the overwhelming testimony of the biblical prophets, they mention regions, peoples, tribes, and nations that surround Israel and attack her. And they're overwhelmingly Middle Eastern, North African nations. So if indeed we're looking at some, kumbaya, Allah, ecumenical, New World religion, then we have to believe that the entire Islamic world is going to convert to this religion. Now, again, if Jesus returns in 100 years, that's certainly possible, but at least right now, it seems very unlikely. We're always looking for some new thing, Oprah's going to send out the email, and all of a sudden the whole world's going to convert to some new religion. I think we need to look at what's right in front of us.
Well, again, we're going to have to wrap this up, but my thanks to Joel Richardson, author of Mystery Babylon, for joining me today. And if you'd like more information about Joel, his book, his website, just go to equippedradio.org. Also, my thanks to the entire crew here at Moody Radio, including Equipped producer Deb Solomon and engineer Chris Pappendick. Thanks so much for joining me. Chris will be back tomorrow with a great show about overcoming our broken past. And then Saturday, join me at 11 a.m. Central Time on Up for Debate. Equipped is a production of Moody Radio, a ministry of Moody Global Ministries. Have a great day, and God bless.